All right, today we're going to be looking at adding integers. And what we have to be really careful with here is we really want to master these rules and think about why these rules work, because adding is tricky, but when we get into subtracting, it's really tricky. We want to make sure that we have a strong understanding of adding integers first. So while we're doing this, what we are going to use is what we call zero pairs, which is a pair of numbers whose sum is 0. And we use them to illustrate addition and subtraction problems. So basically, if I have a counter that's value is +1, and I have a counter whose value is -1, I can bring those into an expression and they represent 0. They're a pair of counters or values that give us 0. So let's look at number 1. A positive plus a positive is what we're looking at first. So I'm going to kind of highlight these to show that a little bit better. But we are looking at positive and a positive. We know how to do this. We're starting with the basics. You've been doing this for a long time, right? So if I start at 3, when we add a positive, we go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which leaves us at 8. I know that you know how to do that. We are demonstrating it on here so we can see how it's going to work when we start throwing in negative values. If I think about these with counters, we started with 3 positives. We are adding in 5 positives, which gives us a total of 8. Now let's look at throwing in some negatives here. So we are going to do a positive plus a negative here. So starting at 8, when we added a positive, we went to the right. So if we are adding over here, we've got positive and a negative. Since we are adding a negative, we're going in the opposite direction. So we're going to go 6 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which puts us at 2. If I think about these with 0 pairs and counters, we have 8 blocks that we started with. We're adding in 6 negatives. And basically what we're doing is we're going to say, okay, this positive and negative cancels each other out. This cancels each other out. This cancels each other out. This cancels each other out. These two cancel each other, and these two cancel each other, which leaves us with 2 positives. Let's look at number 3. We're starting at 2. When we add a positive, we go to the right. But in this instance, we are adding a negative, which means we go to the left 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that leaves me at -3. If I think about it with our counters and our 0 pairs, we started with 2 positives. We added in 5 negatives. Now we're going to see what cancels each other out. These two cancel each other. These two cancel each other to 0. We are left with 1, 2, 3 negatives. And then the last one, we've got +3 plus -7. So we're going to start at 3. When we add a positive, we go to the right, but we're adding a negative, so we're going to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That leaves us at -4. Thinking about it with 0 pairs, we were starting with 3 positives. We added 7 negatives. And we're going to see what cancels out. These two cancel each other out. These two cancel each other. These two cancel each other. What are we left with? 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives. When you're looking here, you might notice 8 and 6. How do I get to 2? I subtract the 2. There were more positives, so it's positive. 2 and 5, we get to 3 by subtracting or finding the difference. This time, there are more negatives than positives. And here, again, the difference between 7 and 3 is 4. This time, there were more negatives than positives. Now let's look at a negative plus a negative. So we have -5 plus -1. So I'm going to start on the left at -5. When we add a positive, we go to the right. We're adding a negative, so we're going 1 to the left, which leaves us at -6. Thinking about it with our counters, we started with 5 negatives. We're adding 1 more. Now we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. Number 6, we're taking a -3 plus -2. I'm starting at -3. When I add a positive, I go to the right. I'm adding a negative, so I'm going to the left 2, which brings me to -5. Thinking about it with our counters, we started with 3 negatives. We're adding in 2 more negatives, which leaves us with 5 negatives. What you might notice here is, how do we get to 6 from 5 and 1? We add them. But since we were adding negatives, it is negative. How do we get to 5 from 3 and 2? We add them, but since we were adding negatives, it is negative. And then looking at negative plus a positive. So we have negative values being added to positive values. So number 7, starting at -1, when we add a positive, we go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. That leaves us at 3. For this one, we started with 1 negative. We're adding in 4 positives. These 2 cancel each other out. We're left with 3 positives. Number 8, starting at -7, we are adding 2. 1, 2 to the right, leaves us at -5. We started with 7 negatives. We added 2 positives. These 2 cancel out. These 2 cancel out. We are left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. And last one here, -6 plus 3. We're starting at -6. When we add a positive, we go to the right. 1, 2, 3. That leaves us at -3. Thinking about it with our counters, we started with 6 negatives. We added 3 positives. These cancel, these cancel, these cancel, and we are left with 3 negatives. When we make the comparisons here, it's kind of like up here, a positive plus a negative. It's just flipped around. We get 3 from finding the difference. There were more positives, so it's positive. We get 5 from finding the difference. There were more negatives, so it's negative. We get 3 from finding the difference. There were more negatives, so it's negative. So let's look at these, let's look at these integer rules that we want to use. So this is going to be really important. Put a star next to it or something. You're going to want to refer back to that because you don't want to have to use a number line and counters every single time. So basically there are 2 rules. When we are adding integers with the same sign, we find the sum. If we are adding integers with different signs, we find the difference. Same, sum, different, difference, okay? So what that means is we ignore the sign and then we just add them. If we were adding positives, they stay positive, negatives stay negative. For finding the difference, we just take the bigger absolute value, the bigger number minus the smaller number. If the bigger number is positive, it's going to be positive. If it's negative, it's going to be negative. So let's just practice a few here. And I'm just going to first go through and highlight the positives versus the negatives. So I have positive here, 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 just so it's easy to see. And then highlighting my negatives. And then let's apply these rules. So we have a positive and a negative. They're opposites, so we find the difference. We are just taking the bigger absolute value, 6 minus 5, which is 1. Since our bigger absolute value is negative, it is going to be negative. There are more negatives. Over here, whoops, that's the same thing. Let's make this 15. Okay. Over here we have opposites, so we find the difference. I'm taking the bigger absolute value, so 15 minus 6 equals 9. This time the bigger number is positive, so it's positive. Number 3, we have opposites. We have a negative and a positive, so we're finding the difference. 9 minus 2 equals 7. Our bigger number is negative, so it is negative 7. Over here, they're the same. Same means sum. So I'm just adding 4 plus 6 equals 10. Since we were adding negatives, it's negative. Number 5, they are opposites. We've got a positive and a negative, so we're finding the difference. 7 minus 3 is 4. The bigger number is positive, so it's positive. Here we have opposites, so we're finding the difference, which is 6. The bigger number is positive, so it's staying positive. Here they are the same. Same means sum, so I'm adding 19 plus 25, which equals 44. Since we were adding negatives, it's negative. Here we've got the opposites, so we're going to find the difference. The bigger number was negative, so it's negative. Now just a little order of operations, kind of doing it in 2 steps. We start on the left, so here first I'm doing 9 plus 22, which is 31. Bring down the plus negative 23. And if we look at this again, we've got a positive, minus or plus a negative. They are opposites, so we find the difference. 31 minus 23 equals 8. Our bigger number was positive, so it's staying positive. Starting on the left, we have 2 numbers that are the same, so we find the sum of 9 plus 16, which is 25. They were negative, so it's negative. Bring down the plus 6. Now we have a negative plus a positive. Those are opposites, so we find the difference. 25 minus 6 is 19. The bigger number here was negative, so it's negative. And then the last part, applying in here the absolute value. So you got to think of these absolute value signs here as like parentheses. We do this first. So within here, we're going to do the absolute value first. We have negative 15 plus 9. They are opposites, so we find the difference, which is 6. There were more negatives, so it's negative. So I bring this down. We have 22 plus the absolute value of 6. First, I'm going to calculate what is the absolute value of 6. That is positive 6. So we have 22 plus 6, which equals 28. Same thing over here. We have these absolute value signs. We're going to start with those first. They are the same, so we're going to find the sum, which is 15, but it's a negative sum. Bring down the rest. The absolute value of negative 15 is positive 15. Oopsies. Bring down the negative 17. Now I've got a negative plus a positive. Those are opposites, so I'm going to find the difference. 17 minus 15 is 2. The bigger number was negative, so it's negative